Hello, and welcome to Here's the Thing with Robbie and Jose, where we explore relationships through a male and female perspective. With me, as always, is the lovely Robbie.
Hello, Jose.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you.
I think I shared with you earlier today that I saw a Roadrunner in front
that's
of my
right.
house.
And I said like a beep beep, and you knew exactly.
Of course.
I've never heard anyone say anything about a Roadrunner.
So for anybody that doesn't know, that's the Looney Tunes. There was a Roadrunner character, Roadrunner, which was always being chased by the coyote of all things. And the coyote never caught the Roadrunner because the Roadrunner was really fast. I don't know. It's
Is that the one too? Wouldn't he like put like anvils off of a cliff and he would hit? Okay.
Yeah, he would always come up with these elaborate, plans to catch him, and they still couldn't catch him. Because he was a thinker. He was trying to outthink the Roadrunner.
So it's like Tweety Bird and Sylvester.
It's
So it's
very
the same
much
thing.
so.
It's like, I want to kill you, but you're going to get killed and come back to life every episode.
Yeah, well, if you look at Looney Tunes in general, they did that a lot too. Because like even Bugs Bunny, the hunters were always trying to get at him, right? Elmer
But did they
Fudd
ever
with
actually did he ever shoot him and then Bugs Bunny is alive after that?
No, he never got a chance.
That's what I'm saying. If you're getting killed, if the anvil that weighs, I don't know, whatever it was, 10,000 pounds lands on you from a cliff, I don't think you'd be getting up for that.
I mean, it's cartoons. But I always felt bad for the coyote because the coyote was super smart, but he just couldn't catch the runner. Anyways, they're really cool looking. I think, you know what I want to be? I might end up exploring being a birder. You know what a birder is?
Just like bird watching?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, where they just go out and watch birds.
There's nothing stopping you.
Except for the fact that there's just so many different variety of birds.
Yeah. You want to buy you a bird book?
And I heard that there are like books that you can like order and it has like pictures of different birds, but I just like birds. I don't know. There's something about a bird that I really like, that they could just get up and fly away wherever.
Got the Roadrunner already on there. Check.
And apparently they can fly, but but yeah, anyways, and I did, one time I did date somebody that didn't like birds, which is really weird because I did like birds. But they didn't like birds.
Because they're like noisy, or they were scared of the movie, the Hitchcock movie?
They really never gave me a reason for why they disliked
movie, The
birds. But it could have been.
I think they gave a lot of people in that generation like a complex of like, yeah.
Yeah, but the whole Hitchcock thing with the shower scene, I'm sure
Psycho.
that gave a lot of people anxiety about taking a shower.
Oh, dude.
Because you have to close your eyes when you're rinsing your hair.
You're the most vulnerable, and you can't hear anything. You couldn't hear if someone came in through the door. Oh, dude.
The shower, yeah.
You got to have a clear door or a clear shower curtain. Like, I need to know if someone... That's terrifying. Oh, my God.
It is, but anyway, so today we're going to be doing... we're going to go down memory lane. So
I love memory lane.
Yay! Or at least for me, anyways.
I don't have your memory.
Yeah, you don't. But I'm gonna bring you into my little world, and I've talked about them in the past, most of them. But it comes from I got an idea from it's a song. It's in Spanish. He's an old singer, very obscure. Most people haven't even heard of him, but it's called The Testament, like in the Last Will and Testament. And so basically, he's going down the line and saying basically out of all the relationships, what he leaves behind. So like he mentions this one girl and he's like, to her, I leave her all my love because she was always wonderful. And to this other girl, I leave her all my hate because she was just horrible. And this other one, she betrayed me. So I'm leaving her, like, you know what I mean? So it's just basically him just saying, like, about of all the women that I've ever been with, like, this is what I leave behind. These are the memories or whatever. So it got me thinking, right? Because there was another thing that I saw. I think it was on, I want to say Facebook. And it was like a lecture. And somebody had asked the guy, like, I got betrayed or whatever. And, but I still care about her. I still love her. And I don't know how to navigate going forward. Anyways, he was doing his best to try to give him advice, although it's a horrible thing to do. But one of the things that he did talk about was like, you also have to make sure that this doesn't happen to you again. And I think whenever there is a breakup or a divorce or anything, yeah, it's very painful, right? But just like any lesson in life, it's supposed to be painful. Hopefully you learn.
I feel bad for people who don't learn anything after a serious breakup. You should learn something, at least one thing.
Right. And it could be a variety of different things. It could be things that you learn about yourself, what you will and will not tolerate. It could be things that you do like, that you never thought that you did enjoy. It could be a variety of different things. And so today is going to be an exploration of that for me. So I don't think it's going to take very long.
Lessons taken. No, I'm sure you've learned some things.
There's some takeaways out of each one of those relationships
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. And so the people, I guess, I mean, if you are of a certain age and you've been dating plenty of years, you've probably learned some lessons. Some of them may be okay. Some of them are probably harder lessons. Like you said, just learning something about yourself that maybe you didn't really want to face, but you kind of, it happened that way.
You know, it's weird because for me, it hit me at a different age, right? So in my 20s, I didn't date that much because I got married in my 20s, in my early 20s. So I missed that whole dating scene. I mean, I remember a little bit of it, but not as much. And it wasn't until I got in my 40s that I really like, okay, now I'm really super duper dating. But up until that time, you know, I was married.
Well, you see that with people who are married for like 30 years and then they get divorced. And let's say it was their high school sweetheart. They have no reference for dating. They have no idea. So like, and maybe let's say it's like your parent and you see them kind of go through dating things that you went to. It's kind of comical in that sense. It's almost like they're reverting to the child almost because they're coming to you and like, why is this? And it's like, but if you've been dating enough, you can give maybe your parents advice.
Yeah.
Because you dated and they didn't.
Right. Exactly. Like, look, Dad, don't bring out the coupons.
Yeah.
when you go out on a first date.
So you had friends that you
but
asked.
it's a 2-for-1. What are you talking about?
You asked like friends, like what's you see it in movies too of like a guy that's back
Now?
out there again. Well, no, not now. When you were after you got divorced, and it's like, okay, I'm having a date.
That was you.
really-
That's what I was asking.
Oh, it was me?
Yeah, I didn't really ask anybody. I mean, I learned the hard way in some
Yeah.
cases, but I was asking you, but it probably was the bad idea to ask because I know you had dated too, but you were also at the time in a committed relationship. So
Yeah, but I got plenty of story. I mean, I learned a lot. Honestly,
for sure. But
probably
you
the
were
best person you could have come
you
to.
you were my I don't know, my Jeeves. As Jeeves. For anybody that doesn't remember that reference, but I had to ask Jeeves, like, what do I do, right?
Yeah.
Because the social norms had changed, and just even courting a woman or dating a woman, it was different than what I remembered. There's some fundamentals that were still there, but nevertheless. So anyways, so I wanted to start out with my first girlfriend, my first love. And so this one, and by the way, I'm not going to use any real names. I'm going to use fictitious names.
Oh, she knows who she is.
Yeah, she does. But for the purpose of this conversation, we're going to call her Gwyneth.
Gwyneth.
Or Gwen.
Okay,
You know,
Gwen.
we'll call her Gwen because Gwyneth is a little too long.
That's long.
We'll call her Gwen, right?
Okay, Gwen.
And it was hard coming up with these names because I had to find names that I hadn't actually dated.
You dated every person's name possible?
Not every, but there's quite a few of them in there. So I had to find a
Like
name.
common names.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, just names. I had to come up with new names, like in general, because they couldn't overlap. Because if I say somebody that I've dated, it's not the same person, but it's still.
I don't even know a Gwen.
Yeah, I don't either.
Okay. All
But
right.
it came from Gwyneth Paltrow because I always had a crush on Gwyneth Paltrow, and I was like,
okay.
oh, she was my first. Anyway,
Does she know?
as a secret crush, probably not. But
Gwen, reach out to us.
Absolutely. But the thing about this one, right? So what I learned about that, and I learned quite a bit, but this was the introduction to relationships and love, romantic love.
So it's your first love, but also your first real relationship.
Yes. And so, and this is something that because of the way that, and I'm not going to go into the whole backstory, but essentially I didn't see her for like 6 months before, we finally met up in person, but we talked on the phone. And it did teach me it is better to get to know them first. It really, really is.
Yeah.
I mean, there's something about it because I remember when we first started talking, we just hit it off from the get-go.
Yeah.
There was no awkwardness between she and I. And even when we first met, by that point, I was just head over heels. But it was an important lesson for me to learn because it wasn't strictly based on looks. And I think about this often, like would we still have gone out if I had met her in person and then sparked up the relationship that way? Or because I got to know her, because all we had was, a voice on the other end of the phone, is that a better way? And quite honestly, once I fell in love, I couldn't. It really, and I know it sounds cliche, it really didn't matter what she looked like at that point. It really didn't. And typically, I even to this day, I probably wouldn't date somebody like her now. But that's my superficial part of it.
But back
If that
then, her looks only. If you saw her somewhere, would you look at her and be like, "Oh, she's cute"? So she was like kind of your type already. You just didn't know it.
kind of. I don't know. I asked
That's what I'm
myself that
saying.
question. I don't
If
know.
she was, if she was a, I'm not even gonna say this word, but like if she wasn't attractive, like at all, like
Right.
nothing,
Yeah.
then you may be telling us a different story right
Could have.
now.
Yeah.
But I'm
I
just
could
saying,
have
but she
missed
was
out.
cute
Yeah.
and you already were attracted to her physically. So that's what I'm saying. If you
Well,
saw her somewhere, you'd be like, oh, her hair's so beautiful, or oh, her smile, whatever.
but see, I don't know which one came first.
The
See,
chicken or the egg.
right. So I don't. I honestly, I think I fell in love with her personality.
Yeah.
When I saw her, it didn't really matter. I just happened to find those traits
Yeah. You
attractive.
got lucky.
I did and I didn't because there were things about. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Not exactly because I probably wouldn't date the physical. Right. If I were to meet somebody like now, I probably wouldn't date them. The way she looks, even the way she
Yeah,
looked
but I
back
mean, a
then.
lot of time has passed and your preferences may have changed.
They have, they have.
Yeah.
But I think what she taught me more than anything was it is better to get to know them on that
Yeah.
level first,
Yeah.
right? Because she was also one of the first women that she was like me. So in my family, we don't hold back our laughs. Obviously, I don't hold back my laugh. I don't, if I'm gonna laugh, I'm gonna laugh. I'm gonna bellow it out. You know what I mean? If it's slightly comical, yeah, you won't hear so much out of me. But if I find something funny, it's hard to shut me up. And that's my whole family's been like that. My sisters, we were always like that. We're always cracking up and having fun. And when we laughed, we laughed. And she was that exact same way. She wouldn't hold back. She had this big, giant bellow of a laugh. And I just love that because I'm like, oh, you're just as goofy as I am. Where, sometimes girls want to be a little too cool for school and they don't
Yeah.
want to show just how funny it is. No, like
They're
she
like,
would, yeah, she would get like red and she would just laugh out loud, which made me want to make her laugh even more
yeah.
because I just enjoyed hearing those things, right, or whatever. And so the physical part came afterwards. And I think, ironically enough, with my marriage, it was almost the exact same thing. I didn't find her physically attractive at the time.
So you took that lesson on to when you met your wife. It's like, let me get to know her, and then the feelings grew, and then you start to find them physically attractive
Yes.
because you are attracted to their personality.
Yep. And it's very feminine.
Do you think that we don't do that anymore because we're always like, let's go, let's figure out what's, you know what I mean? I don't think we take that time really to slow down and get to know someone.
Yeah, I think sometimes what ends up happening, especially in this day and age, because you have to get past the physical part. And if you don't find them physically appealing, that usually stops you in your tracks.
Yeah.
It's hard for them to, no pun intended, penetrate because they've already made up their mind. I don't find you attractive. So once they've already said that, don't get me wrong, guys being what and I've seen guys do it, they still try, like maybe she'll change her mind. It's never really worked as far as I've seen it, or, maybe I just don't, once I hear that, I'm done. I'm like, cool, great. I'm going to move on to something else.
Well, I'm sure it's happened at some point in time. Like you may be like hard no, but let's say you have to be around that person because let's say you work together. So it's not like you're like no and then you never see him again. And then maybe, I don't know, maybe this guy is like really funny and genuine and maybe you really like him. You're like, at first I was like, no, but again, your attraction to their personality makes them physically attractive.
It could be. That's what I'm saying. But for me, once I hear a no, I'm out, right? I'm like, there's no point in me pursuing it because you've already made it clear. So I'm just going to go do something else, whatever. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't get mad or anything, but there's no point in me playing around with the idea of, oh, she might fall in love with me just get it out of your head, move on to something else.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying. Therein lies the problem because again, those two people could have maybe been perfect for one another, but they just couldn't get past the looks part. And what this taught me was you can actually get to know somebody, and once you get to know them, everything else will fall in line because you're so emotionally attached to them. You laugh at the same jokes. They're there to hear you whenever you're having a problem. You've gone through a bunch of stuff with them or whatever. It's like looks doesn't matter at that point anymore. Now, don't get me wrong. and this is where, like, whenever you're a unit, you go outside, and then outside forces sometimes can influence you, right? Like other people come into your orbit, and it's always you always have to be very careful not to bring too many people into your orbit because it could jeopardize your relationship.
Yeah.
So in other words, if I'm going to commit a relationship and there's somebody at work that I find super attractive, I'm probably not going to hang out with that person. If I have to see them at work, that's one thing. But outside of work, I'm not going to put myself in there because I already know
Yeah.
that I'm attracted. And it's like I have a girlfriend, so I need to be not over there.
Yeah. Tip to the
Because
fellows.
yeah, because
Stay
like
away.
you have to, and for the girls too, mind you,
Yeah.
especially if they find somebody that's cute or whatever. It's
Don't go
like
to happy hour with that
you
person.
can't. That's what I'm saying. You have to be very careful. It's
Yeah.
basically you go out with happy hour with people you don't like. Or if you're both single and you like each other, sure, by all means,
Yeah.
it happen. But if you're in a committed relationship, don't play with fire.
Yeah.
Just don't do it. That's my suggestion. Again, for the people that have, willpower, fair enough.
Well, it just made me think of, like, I don't know if you've ever seen this show, but Married at First Sight. There have been people on there where they were not attracted to them at all, but they stayed together because obviously through that process, I can't remember, you have to move in with them right away, but you're learning and you may start to be attracted to them based on their personality. Yeah. So it can work. I'm sure it's difficult.
But she taught me that I guess because again, the second time that I did that was a long-term relationship, as a marriage. So
Yeah.
she taught me it's better to get to know them on that level.
Oh, thank you, Gwen.
Yeah, Gwen did really good on that.
I mean, I like it. I wish we did more of that now. I just think everyone's in a hurry. Everyone's like, let's get to the next stage, or let it just be this, or it's just too much force, I think.
It's I don't think it's that exactly. I think that's always, yeah, there's going to be people that want to rush into it. It's mostly just looks. It's very superficial nowadays.
Right.
And we've gotten, I think, I think that's the problem with some relationships, not all, where it's like, yeah, I'm miserable. I can't stand to be around her, but she's super hot, so I'm not going to let her go.
Do you think we ever get to a point where they have a dating app where there is no photos, where it's just profiles? Do you think anyone would?
They actually, Ted Lasso has it, where you match up with people, but there's no profile.
There's talking about real life.
I know, but I think they try to do it. I don't think it would work.
That's what I'm saying. People wouldn't a small group of people be open to that.
But that's what I'm saying. The majority of the people, they're like, if I don't find them physically attractive, I don't even want to bother.
Yeah.
Because now I've gotten so emotionally attached.
But the thing too, the danger thing, because you don't know if that person's who they say they are anyway. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, yeah.
Like if I'm 80 years old and I'm trying to pretend I'm 20, well, photo right there. Well, I guess you can grab one off the internet. But I'm just saying, like, you know what I mean?
Well, that's what I'm saying. So like if you, in modern day, the way it would work is that you would just need to postpone the physical part. You like the way they used to do it.
Okay.
So you have to postpone it like 3 or 6 months.
We were more like that. Let's maybe wait on the physical part. Let's get to know each other, see if there's really something here before. And that's kind of how, in my personal life, how I kind of take that. It's like, I'm not going to jump in bed with you right away because it's like, I need to know if I kind of like you. Like,
and that's what I'm saying. It takes discipline and willpower, which people just unfortunately just do not have. But nevertheless, and then I'm going to go to my most horrible experience. But the lesson that I learned, and her I'm going to call Alexa.
Okay.
For my own reasons. But anyways, for Alexa, what I did learn is that people change. And I know that sounds silly and it sounds cliche-ish, but people do change. And therein lies a problem in relationships. Whenever you're in a relationship, let's say you've been in a relationship for 10 years, the person that you're with now is not the person you fell in love with 10 years ago.
Right.
I know that they say, no, it is. It's still the same person. Technically, yes.
In the physical sense, it's the same person.
Yes. But their interests have changed. They've evolved. And they're going to be different than who they are. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's better or worse. To just be clear about that. Because I'm not saying that it's worse. I'm just saying you're dating somebody different now. Or you're married to somebody different now than you are when you were. And you can see that it's really evident. And I'm going to use extremes here. But like if you see, people that have been married 50, 60 years and they're in their 80s and 90s, clearly they're not the same people that they were when they were in their 20s.
Right.
Clearly. But that's an extreme, but it's just as relevant, I think, within 5 years or 2 years.
Yeah.
Life-changing events happen. And people grow, people change, people evolve their taste, their preferences, the way they the way they handle things,
Right.
they're going to be different.
Yeah. And the age will also amplify that. So if you're in your 20s and 30s, you're changing the most.
Oh
You know
yeah.
what I mean?
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah, you're going to change forever, but it's amplified during those, 20 years or whatever.
Yeah. And it's, I think that gets forgotten, but I learned that lesson is that,
Mm.
oh, people change. So the person that I'm in a relationship now is not the same person that I was with.
So you have to be able to adapt to the change and hope that they want to with you as well.
You kind of almost have to reconnect with them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You can't take it for granted that, oh, they're just that way.
Yeah.
They just do this. That's just the way they are. It's like, no, they're different. You need to, and I think with conversations, right? You need to have the day-to-day conversations. You need to have the mundane, and then you need to have the serious ones from time to time. And then sometimes, and I'm a big proponent, you don't need to talk at all. But nevertheless, you do need to understand who that person is. So if you're in a relationship, for instance, and your day-to-day and your husband or your wife is not asking you about the day-to-day,
Yeah.
the problem with that is they're not going to understand when something happens and you react a certain way
Right.
because it's been leading up to that.
Yeah.
And a lot of times there's a lot of different things that you just don't want to discuss for one reason or the other, but you still have to be engaged with them and ask them like, what's going on? Where have you been? Blah, blah. At their core, they might be the same, but the way they react to different, again, they're going to be older, they're going to be wiser, they're going to be whatever.
Yeah.
They're going to be different.
Yeah.
They're going to be different.
And when it is positive, it's a beautiful thing because then you could look back. Let's say you're with them for 20 years and you'd be like, oh, I remember when we first got together, you were this, and like you're so much better now because you've grown, you've evolved.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It can be really nice.
yeah.
And then you have the memories, which is always cute.
Yeah, and it can be actually, kind of hot too, because again, you can try out new things and be like, hey, like let's do this together. We've never done this before, and now it's exciting. It's like, oh, it's like I'm dating a new person or whatever. So it can be, and I think part of that. What I will say, the other lesson that I learned in conjunction with this, right, is you have to pay attention. Most people don't pay attention because again, they just figured, well, they're that.
Yeah.
They're always going to be that. Oh, that's Alexa. That's just the way she is. And it's like, no. And you see them from time to time change a little bit.
Yeah.
And that women are really good about picking this up. When they see that their man are changing, that's
yeah.
usually a red flag for them. Like, why do you care now what
Why
you
are
look
you
like?
parting your hair on the other
Yes.
side?
Or why are you getting dressed better now? Before you didn't. Like all of a sudden now you're dressing up. And usually they start feeling a certain kind of way because like, well, you're not dressing up for me because
Yeah.
it's me. It's like, it might be for you if you're noticing.
Guys don't notice. I think that men are not as detail oriented, so they're not going to pick up on unless it's really overt. But like, they're not going to pick up on a lot of those things.
Yeah, it's hard. The opposite. That's what I'm saying. For a guy, we get busy trying to establish ourselves, and I'm sure women do too, mind you. Sometimes it's difficult to stop and pause and figure out what's going on in your relationship. You just take it for granted that that's your rock. They're always going to be there. Because, especially in marriage, that's what you signed up for, right? You said you're not going to leave me, and I said I'm not going to leave you. So it allows me to go on and try to conquer the world. The problem is it's fickle because that person, yeah, they made that commitment at that time, but now they're in a different space and they're like, I'm not happy. I want to leave. And it's like, okay,
Yeah, because you
now
can't
what?
be with someone where if they are too involved with their own thing and they're not paying attention to you, they're not noticing. That's basically like you're not in a relationship at all. No one wants to be in a relationship and be ignored or not notice. You know what I mean? Like I hear this complaint and I've said it a million times. Women say when they change their hair, men don't notice, which is so aggravating for us because it could even be a very drastic change. I'm not talking about like you go get a trim or something. I'm saying a very drastic hair change. The man doesn't even notice. You'd be like, oh, you didn't notice my hair. And then it'll be like, oh, what did you do? What did it look like before? Like they...
That's not what men sound. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, that was really derogatory. I'm sorry, man.
No, I'm just... But, there's a flip side of that coin too. Just FYI, right? Because on a male's perspective, if a guy does a bunch of stuff around the house and takes care of the house, maintains it, does the lawn, takes care of the plumbing, pays the bills, make sure that when things are broken, they get fixed. That becomes also a thing too. It's not like, so they get overlooked as well. It's just like, hey, and I don't know, I can say for me, I don't do it, but it's just one day it's broken, the next day it's fixed. Guys typically don't go out and say, "Hey, I fixed this." They might even say it in passing, like, "Just FYI, it's fixed now, so you don't have to worry
So
about
it's
the
not really about
shower
noticing.
heading."
You're talking about words of affirmation.
No, I'm talking about noticing because if a woman doesn't notice those things, she's also overlooking him too. Because he went out of his way. Let's say you're like, hey, this stupid, let's say you didn't even have to necessarily ask him to do it, but this stupid sink is whatever, it's leaking or it's making this weird sound or whatever, the pressure's not right. And he hears that and he's like, okay, what he's hearing is she needs to get this fixed. So he goes out there, he fixes it. And then all of a sudden it's working. It's like, oh, it's working. It's like, yeah, I fixed it. It's like, oh, okay. And then you just move
So you
on.
want her to say, that's what I'm saying. You want her to say, thank you for fixing this thing.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If you notice, yeah. So the same thing with the hair thing. You want them to say, "Oh, you look nice."
No,
You
it's
just
not about even looking nice. It's just like, oh, you changed your hair, just the notice part. So
exactly the
the sink
noticing.
thing
It's
is
both.
different because you're saying that if you fix the sink, you're wanting her to say, thank you. I really appreciate you
Well, just
fixing
to
this.
notice it because sometimes you want. Let's just say that she's. Let's say you fixed it, and then you went out and go did something right, and then you notice that it's working, and it's never brought up again, and it's just working now, and you know who did it. You know who did it. So he did it, and that was it. And then that's that. You
But she
just move on.
notices that it's fixed and she knows who did it. So that's, again,
Well, he
different
notices it
than,
too. He might not mention it that your hair is different. He might not mention it. That's what I'm saying. We could play that game too, but I think it's that is that people get taken for granted, right? When you do change your appearance, right? You're trying something new, right? Obviously, for a woman, it's like, hey, I'm trying something new. Hopefully, it's trying to make yourself better or feel good or whatever. And at the same time, maybe it's also your husband or your significant other is going to like it, which is an added plus, right? Because you're trying something different. You always want to, you have to be very careful because if it didn't come out, if you got bangs,
yeah.
and it's just not a good look for you, the guy might be like, "Ooh, yeah." And maybe he doesn't want to say anything because he doesn't want to say anything bad too. And sometimes that happens as well. So it's not necessarily, sometimes I think they don't notice. I will give you that. Sometimes it's just like, it's better just not to say anything because it could open up a door because like, oh, you got bangs. And they're like, oh, you don't like them or what? And they're like, because you got to be honest, right? So maybe if you don't like them, you have to be like you have to tippy toe around a little bit and be like, oh, yeah, I mean.
I'm talking about when you say it and they didn't even notice. They're like, oh,
Oh,
what
well,
was
yeah.
it before?
Yeah. I mean, it could be that. I know that for me, because I was at home all the time and sometimes I would do things around the house. And then when she came back, it was fixed, right? Because she would travel a lot for her job. So again, it was really no.
So
Maybe
you,
she didn't notice it, or again, it's not. She just didn't notice it.
okay.
So it was broken before, and then she came home, it's fixed, and she didn't notice it. And even if I were to say the same thing, like, "Hey, I fixed this thing," oh yeah, I didn't notice. It's the same. It's the same scenario.
Okay.
So if you're not noticing, if you're not paying attention to your partner, that's my only point. That happens, and you have to notice the little things too, not just the drastic changes. Because by the time they're already in a drastic change, and let's say you stop and pause, and like, oh, I see now she's wearing more, she's working out more, and she's those dresses are getting tighter and tighter. By the time you notice it, there's a whole evolution that went there,
Yeah.
and now you're just seeing it because it's just so noticeable. Then now you're like, oh, that's different, right? Like it's totally
It just
whatever.
made me think of how observant I am in a relationship. Like, even if you change the way you took your coffee, I would notice and ask about it. I'd be like, oh, you changed the way you take your coffee. I mean, I notice everything, like and I'm sure a lot of women are too, but it's just like every little change for the guy. Maybe it's like you said, it has to be extreme of like their body is transforming or, you know what I mean? They're working 12-hour days now where they used to work 8, something,
Yeah.
pretty obvious.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. You have to keep that connection going, and you have to just keep up with the day-to-day stuff.
Yeah.
But the other thing, and this is Gwen taught me this, but it's not something that I really didn't resonate with me until much later on, until my dating age in my 40s.
Okay.
Because again, I met Gwen when I was 13.
Okay.
So that was a long time ago. It's a long, long time ago. Just FYI. But anyways, what I was going to say is she had a sadness to her. And it's weird because when I think of her, I think of her as laughing. I always think of her with a smile on her face. But when I really do and really sit back and think about it, there was a sadness to her. And what I've noticed is that with other women that I've dated since then, sometimes there's a sadness to them. That's just an underlying sadness.
Yeah.
And for the most part, I'm a kind of upbeat guy. So I don't get me wrong, I get sad from time to time too. Like it happens. I'm human, right? But for the most part, I'm pretty, pretty happy. I like to keep a smile on my face. I just enjoy living life that way. And what I've noticed is that sometimes they're hurting for one reason or the other. And it's hard to sometimes stop and really, because you're assuming I'm happy.
So
So
why
if,
isn't everybody?
yeah, it's like I'm happy, and then and don't get me wrong, and then I'm not trying to be insensitive about things, right? But a lot of times I'm like, well, I can't for the life of me think of why she would be unhappy or why she's feeling sad. But therein lies the point. You don't know.
Right.
You don't know. There might be something that's bothering her that for you might not be, let's say, a big deal, but for her it is. So it's important. It's important to her.
It's a continuous sadness. So it's not just like for a short period of time. You're talking about the whole time that you are dating someone, they're just kind of sad.
Yeah, there's a sadness there, and again, I'm trying to be careful because I don't want to go into too much into like depression because I don't know if that's exactly that's what that was.
Yeah.
Although I do, and I've had, and we're going to go through that because there's some other women that I've dated that were.
But you can recognize it. You know what that looks like based on Gwen. You could tell.
Yes, now I can. Now I can
Right.
fine tune it, but it didn't. It eluded me until I started dating women. And when I got in my dating in my 40s,
Yeah.
that's when I really started to notice. Like, wait a minute, it wasn't just her. And even and who was the other weird part about it? Even in my marriage, she would never tell me when she was sad. Unfortunately for her, she would like to drink. That was her coping mechanism. So she would drink, and that's when I knew something was bothering her, but she would never vocalize it with me.
But you notice that change. Your point of like the changing and the noticing.
Yeah, I
Okay.
can notice it. And
You just didn't know why.
I just didn't know why, and she wouldn't talk to me sometimes. Well, for the Gwen, not so much. Gwen would talk to me,
Yeah.
and I knew what was going on with her at the time. It was more like I think at the time it was like her mother. We were teenagers, right? So first love, hormones are going everywhere. There's a
Right.
lot going on there. Everything's amplified. Everything is a big deal.
Yeah.
Everything is a big
all or
deal.
nothing, baby.
Everything, yes. It's like living in a drama. Like it's just so powerful at the time. And then of course you get older, and it's those things still happen, but you're better equipped to deal with them.
Right.
And it's you take it a little more. Hopefully you're more pragmatic about it.
Yeah.
But there was a certain sadness, and I noticed that when I started dating, I dated more and more women that were dealing with depression, and they were taking medication for it. And because again, for me, Alexa, she started dabbling around trying to go get help
Yeah.
right towards the end of our relationship.
Yeah.
That's when she was like, okay, maybe I do need to go talk to somebody and see a therapist and maybe
Yeah.
get on some medications and whatnot. But she was kind of resistant to it. And so I was just like, okay. But then later on down the line, as I dated more women, I noticed, oh, wait a minute, this is a real thing. Like it's
Yeah.
really out there. I know it sounds stupid, but it's like I just didn't know
Yeah.
that it was such a common thing
Yeah.
to be,
And now
sad
you
a
know
lot.
how to combat that. I think if I'm understanding, like you being able to recognize that and learning from that, you can kind of, I don't want to say use kid gloves, but you know what I mean? You can be a little bit more sensitive
Yeah.
when you recognize, okay, this person is dealing with some things.
Yeah.
I need to be a little bit more aware of what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, here's the other thing now too. I kind of almost have to stop a little bit whenever I notice it too much. Whenever I'm dating somebody, not because for any other reason, because I know that whatever they're dealing with has nothing to do with me, right? And so sometimes that can get in the way, though, even though it has nothing to do with me, it can actually surface while we're together.
Right.
And it becomes an issue later on down the line. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, you have to be, well, and from that, right, I will say this: what I've learned out of all those experiences was to be patient. You just have to be patient because again, the natural instinct is like, well, like everything's going good for you, right? And from the outside looking in, that's maybe that's what it looks like. Like you're
Right.
doing this, you're doing that, you're killing it, you're crushing it, you're beautiful, you got a home, like you're a magnificent person, blah 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 blah. Why would you be sad? And it's like you just don't know. They
Right.
have their reasons.
Yeah.
But sometimes if it's such a powerful thing as you're dating and they haven't dealt with it or really not dealing with that issue,
Yeah.
it's gonna come up later on.
Yeah, it's really hard if you are. I mean, we all have our things, but if you're generally like a happy person and you've dealt with your own trauma and you just want to be happy and you get with someone that's down all the time, it is hard. I'm not trying to sound insensitive, but it's hard to continue a relationship when you're like, let's go have fun, whatever. And they're like, no, I don't want to do, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah, it's very,
Like, and you want to be
especially
sensitive.
if you're ready to go out. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly,
but
exactly.
where do you find that balance? Like, what do you do at that point? Because you're gonna feel terrible to break up with them and be like, I can't be with you. You're not gonna say this, but like,
Right,
you're sad
right,
too much. I can't.
right. And we all have our own thing, right? We all have
Yeah.
our baggage, mind you. But yeah, sometimes if it's too powerful,
Yeah,
it's really hard to combat.
yeah,
And and sometimes what I've noticed is if I go out like on a first or second date and I notice it too much, I kind of know that they're probably not in the right space to date.
yeah,
So sometimes I like to be just a sympathetic ear. Like you really, right now, you don't really need a date. You just
Right.
need a friend.
yeah,
So I'm okay being that, especially on the first and second date or whatever. Like I'll be your friend. I'll listen to you for sure. I don't know if it'll go anywhere
Yeah.
after that because again, I don't think what the vibe that I'm getting is I'm getting the vibe that you really shouldn't be dating right now.
right. If I go on a date with a guy and the whole date he's talking about his ex and clearly he hasn't dealt with it or whatever, and let's say that he, says, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk about it so much, please forgive me. You're like, okay, we've all had those.
Sure.
Fine. Okay. You go out with him again and it's the same thing. It's like, bro, like you're going through something. I don't want to date you. Like, I'm sorry. I'm sure you're great, but like
Exactly.
you need to deal with
And
this
that's
first.
that's a perfect example. That's a perfect example because sometimes the inclination can be there when somebody's that vulnerable, whether it's a guy or a girl, right? When they're that vulnerable, they're not thinking straight,
Right.
and they can be taken advantage of very, very easily.
Yeah.
And whether you're a guy or a girl, because if you're a guy, it can happen to you too. We both know how girls, how that was going to play itself out, right?
Yeah.
Because the guy's thinking, oh, this is an easy,
Yeah.
whatever. But for a guy, it's also dangerous because if he gets with the wrong woman, she could be like, hey, let's just order champagne and it's really expensive. This, or let's go on a shopping spree. It's going to get you to feel better.
I'm
And you're
behind
like,
on my rent.
Yeah,
Can you give me
exactly.
some money?
and they play on the fact that they want to help out.
Right.
Like, I want to feel useful or whatever because guys have their thing too. And it's like, yeah, sure, let me help you out. And then they feel a little bit better because they're doing something.
Yeah, you
but
feel like worthy, like, okay, someone needs me and it feels good and
Exactly.
she's beautiful and she's spending time with me and I like her. And like,
exactly.
Yeah.
But if you're in a vulnerable spot, it's better you deal with those things before you get out there.
Yeah.
Because there's wolves out there, and the wolves will come out, both male and female. They will come out,
Yeah.
and they will get you if you're not careful. So I learned to spot that out, and sometimes again, depending on how bad it is, I might say, yeah, we'll go forward anyways. And there's other times when I'm like, this is not a good thing.
Yeah.
Because they're just not in the right space right now. They're
Yeah.
just not in there. And you feel bad because there's nothing you can do, but you know that if they keep on going out there, because I know men, and if they keep on going out there the way they are, it's just going to be heartbreak after heartbreak after heartbreak.
Yeah.
And it's just going to compound the already, whatever you're dealing with, is just going to compound it even more.
So is that a lesson that Gwen taught you in the sense of like you recognize what the sadness is and maybe that's just not for you per se?
I think so. I think what she taught me was to recognize it because sometimes it's underlined. In other words, for the most part, when I remember her being very happy and go lucky. And I tended to not really pay attention to the other side too much.
You know what makes me think about, and this is going to get real dark, but when you,
Oh, no.
I mean, even darker than it is, but like when you, no, don't laugh before I say this because it sounds terrible.
Okay, yeah.
But like when someone commits suicide and they ask the friends and family, and then no one ever notices it until afterwards. And like, you know what? He was really sad, or he
Yeah.
did do these things. You know what I mean? You start to like, then you see
Yeah.
afterwards.
Yeah. What I will say is this. This is what I've learned from dating sometimes the people that are going through things, or sadness, if you will, is what I call it. Because I don't want to write out called depression, because I'm not a trained therapist. So I don't know
Yeah.
what that looks like, right? But what I will say is this: is the problem that happens is that when you get into a relationship like that, and it's something that they're dealing with that it's really hard to deal with, the majority of the relationship is going to be in dealing with that.
Right.
And the problem is that for a person like myself, again, for the most part, I'm optimistic, but I go through my days too.
Right.
But you will never hear from that, because we're so focused on what's going on with you that whatever's going on with me gets put to
There's
the
no
side.
time for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because it's like, no, we're focusing on her.
Yeah.
We're trying to make her feel better. We're trying to cheer her up. We're trying to be there emotionally for her. But I have needs too, but it's like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
There's no time for your needs, because we need to focus too much on that. And that's when a relationship gets really, really lopsided, especially, and I hate to put it this way, but sometimes, especially if she's really beautiful or whatever, but she's going through stuff, you want to help out. As a guy, sometimes you're wired that way. You're like, I really want to help her out.
Right.
The problem is, again, that what you're doing is you're forsaking yourself.
Yeah.
You're basically saying, okay, if you go into this relationship, just know it will never be about you.
Yeah.
And you're not even, sometimes, mind you, and I say sometimes because it happens, when you want to open up and you're like, hey, I'm going through stuff, they don't want to listen.
Right.
They'll listen to however it's like, yeah, I had a bad
It's
day.
superficially listening.
Well, it's like, hey, I had a bad day at work, like my boss, this, that, and then they might turn around and say, yeah, I had a really bad one too. And he started up, but then, and it just goes on. It's like, okay, sorry, I was just trying to share. Right?
Yeah.
But herein, and this is the other important thing that I learned too, and this is when I was with Alexa, right, is that I would keep things from her for that reason.
Yeah.
So because it was mostly focused around her and whatever her needs were, anytime I had things that I was dealing with, I just had to deal with them on my own. And sometimes whenever I had like mini crises, right, because you would say, well, you don't want to keep things, but it's like, let's say we had a little crisis or whatever, I would handle it and she would know nothing about it.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to burden her, because A, she was already dealing with things, whatever those things were.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to burden her anymore. Right. And you would say, well, no, you're supposed to share and this, that. But I've gotten accustomed to that. Even to this day, I have a lot of people that come up to me and need a shoulder to cry on. And I'm perfectly okay with that. But I don't really share my feelings too much anymore. Because most of the time and I have, just so that we're clear, I have a ton of people that I could call. Don't get me wrong. I always got people. But at the same time, those people also have lives.
Yeah.
And they have their own relationships and they have their own things that they're dealing with. So I've just kind of learned to deal with it myself. And when you're in a relationship, sometimes you do need that person to just hear you. They might not be able to fix your problem, but it's something for me that I still struggle with.
Right.
Because it's mostly centered around the woman and whatever her needs are. And what the irony of it is that the more you do that, it becomes the relationship becomes lopsided. But because you're so available, sometimes they get bored of you, which is a weird thing. They take you for granted because they're like, you're always going to be there.
Right.
No matter what, you're going to be there. And it's all about me. So you're going to be there for me. And I think, people, I think even on the woman side, they know what that's like too.
Yeah.
When a guy is doing a bunch of stuff that he can't get his stuff together. And you're constantly trying to support him and do your own stuff. And because I hear this complaint a lot too. It's like, what about me?
Yeah.
Like I have stuff too, but I'm over here trying to support him and his endeavor that, he wants to be a rock star. He bought an acoustic guitar and now all of a sudden he thinks he's Elvis.
Yeah. I have definitely done that before. I've been in a relationship where it was just that. It was like that person was emotionally needing so much from me that I did the same thing you did. It's like I just dealt with things, just handled it and never brought it up it's hard because it's like, it's not a good practice per se, but the alternative to your point, even when you do try to tell them like, hey, I'm going through this thing, they could care less.
Yeah.
And then you're just getting hurt again. So it's like, okay, forget I said anything. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right.
So
Because
like,
you're
what
like,
do
I
you
give so
do?
much, and you
Yeah.
can't even give me a simple, just
Right.
listen to me. I know exactly what that's like. I
Yeah.
hear that complaint a lot whenever I go on first dates, where they're like, yeah, he just didn't listen to me, and I did so much. And don't get me wrong, in that relationship with Alexa, because I was always dealing with things,
Yeah.
and I was just taking care of business, so to speak, right? She felt neglected. Out of all those things, because I was doing all those things for her, I just never shared what I was doing.
So your lesson is that maybe you should have shared a little bit more of what you were handling. So she would look at it like, okay, I may not be getting the attention I exactly want right now, but it's because here's all these positive things that he's taking care of for me or
I
us.
think, I think, and I think this is where that's not exactly it. It's more, if I need to pay attention to her, but she also needs to pay attention to what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And if she's not paying attention, then, or if she's just taking it for granted that I'm doing it,
Right.
right? And people get taken for granted all the time, right?
Yeah.
Some guys come out and they're used to walking out, and in the morning there's breakfast, and they don't question it. It happened for years, right? But they never think about the fact that she's getting up earlier than everybody else, starting going in the kitchen, getting her day going, and bringing out breakfast. You're just like, I just expect my breakfast, right?
Yeah.
And you don't acknowledge it. After a while, you're just kind of like, well, where's my breakfast at? Like it becomes, you
And
become
that day
entitled.
you get some cyanide in your eggs. You're like, what? Okay.
It could. But I think whenever a relationship is when it's too lopsided like that, and they're going through so many things,
Yeah.
you do have to sometimes be like, hey, I can't do this.
Right.
I really, and it was weird because I don't know if you saw it. I know you haven't, but anyways, there's a movie that came out, got an Oscar, Everything Everywhere All the Time. It's a great movie, and it's a great example of what I'm talking about, because it goes into the science part of it, but at the end of the day, at its core, it's about a relationship. It's about it's essentially, I think everybody's already seen it, but it's essentially about she's upset because of what her life is, and she's so down about, she wanted much more, and she's kind of re-examining a little bit, like, I got married and then I had a kid, and because of those things, this is where I'm at now.
Yeah.
And anyways, my whole point with that is that you just have to pay attention. And if it's too lopsided, if they're dealing with too many things, sometimes it's better just to let them go and say, hey, go deal with your stuff.
Yeah.
Because you can only be so supportive, but not at the expense of your own self. You know what I mean? Like your own mental health.
Yeah, but for women, like we talked about before, I mean, like women can find a man easily. So if she doesn't take that, if you say like, look, I think you're a great person, but you need to deal with some things, she's just going to go find another guy that's going to be that for her. You know what I mean? And then guys will allow it. And it's this continuous cycle of her not actually taking pause unless she decides on her own, like, hey, I need to not date, take pause. I need to like work on myself, but can't make them do that.
Well, and that's the other thing, right? Is that, yeah, they might find a guy that's also does the same thing, but chances are they're going to find a bunch of guys that do not. And that's when they start getting, unfortunately, taken advantage of, because it's like, okay, you're sad, right? I'm going to make you happy if you make me happy, kind of thing. You know what I mean? And for a moment, we'll be happy.
Yeah.
For a fleeting moment, it's going to be great. But then right after that moment is done, you're going to go back to reality, which is you are in the same predicament that you were yesterday, right? And I think there's a lot to be said about people dealing with their own stuff.
Yeah.
That's outside of the relationship, because I don't think you can. I don't think you can function well until you take care. Have you ever seen that movie? I think it's got Melanie Griffin and Andy Garcia. It's about, she goes to rehab for she's an alcoholic, and she goes to rehab, and he's being very supportive or whatever, and they have daughters. And there's a scene in there where they get into a fight where she basically tells him, like, just leave me alone. I need to deal with this. Like, I get that you're supportive, and I'm not saying you shouldn't be, but like, it has nothing to do with you. I have to get this done. I have to do the work, and then we can get back into the relationship, because you're trying to blend the two. And this is something that I need to do by myself, if that makes sense. And I think sometimes that has to happen.
Yeah.
Like, you can be supportive, but sometimes you need to let them go on their own journey and get them, if they want to, because what ends up happening is if they get too dependent on you, again, it turns into a vicious cycle. It's like they're sad all the time, or they're for a girl. Let's say he's trying new different things and he's not
You're trying to make her
succeeding.
not sad, you mean?
Right. Yeah. Well, no, I'm just saying, like, let's say in the opposite of that, where it's all about the guy, right, in the relationship. And let's say he's trying this and trying that, and he's borrowing money, and he's doing this, and he's just not really following through. And you're like, hey, like, I can't continue to do this. You know what I mean? Like, something's got to give. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
And I'm not saying you shouldn't support people, right? You should, but at the same time, it's like, okay, let's get that taken care of first
Yeah.
before we can move forward, right? Because
Yeah.
clearly there are some things going on your side. Maybe you haven't figured it out, and that's fine. You don't know what you want to do in life, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
But that was also something that I've had to learn, and it's sometimes a little painful because it's funny. I've been in relationships and I've like talked to women during dating where the majority of the time it's them telling me what's going on with their life
Yeah.
and all the different issues that they're dealing with. And I don't speak very much. And they think that's the best relationship in the world. It's like, you're so easy to talk to. I just love being around you. And this is like, okay, but you really don't know me. because the majority of the time we're just talking about you.
Yeah.
Like, what do you really know about me other than
Right.
the stuff that you saw on my Facebook profile? Like, you know what I mean?
It's
Like,
such
I
a
have
weird
kids.
thing because when I meet men, it's like I'm genuinely interested in what is it that you like? What is it about you? Like tell me some things. Like what's your family dynamic? Whatever. It's like I'm generally interested in those
Yeah.
things. So I've never been on a date where I'm just like me, like,
Yeah.
and just like,
And I don't like talking about myself for that matter either. Because you can see whenever, especially if they ask you a question, like something like that, and then I start talking and they get glazed over, they get on their phone, I'm done. I will stop. I will stop. I will shut down. Because there's no point in me wasting my
Yeah.
breath. I got other things to do. So, and this is across the board for any conversation, by the way.
Yeah.
If I'm ever talking to somebody and they get on their phone, I will stop abruptly. And even they're like, no, I'm listening. I'm like, no, I'm done.
yeah.
Because I'm not going to talk. I'm not,
Right.
because you're doing something else, whatever that is. And I'm trying to be respectful, but I'm not going to waste my
It's
breath.
like a jab. It's like whatever you're saying, I don't care about. So I'm going to do this other thing and you can be background noise. And I'm like, but like, yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
It's
I mean, I would say out of all those women, right, and a lot of the ones that I've dated, and they would know because for any of them, you can go back and ask them what I was going through at the time, and they couldn't tell you. They just didn't. Again, they just assumed that everything was good on my side,
yeah,
which is
because you're always there to listen to them.
Yeah, yeah.
You're always here to like
Yeah.
hear my problems.
Yeah, and so and I like doing that, mind you. But yeah, sometimes, and just on a personal note, sometimes it is rough because, yeah, I'm in a position where I can help people, and that doesn't necessarily mean like like financial or anything. Sometimes it's emotional, and I love doing it. But it seems like sometimes I only get called up whenever something's going on.
I feel like I'm like you. I like to be there for people if they need that. But for me, it has to be mixed in with good stuff too, like the fun times. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like a friendship or whatever. It's like if you're just down it's really hard. I'm not trying to sound insensitive, but like it has to be mixed in with, we do have lots of fun together. And then there's going to be times where we're going to have conversations where you're going to come to me and be like, I'm going through this thing. I need to talk about it. Cool. This conversation is not, we're not going to be laughing and whatever, but it's fine because we have that sprinkled in all over.
And most of the time, that's what I'm saying. A lot of times, what ends up happening, the relationship turns into they call me when something's going on, when they're dealing with something, and that's most of the time. It doesn't always start out that way, but sometimes
In
it
dating
is.
or just general?
Just in dating, but sometimes it happens just in regular
Or maybe in the
relationships.
dating, they only call you when they're hungry. They're like, oh, you want to go to this place?
I'm a good listener. Let's just put it that way. I'm a good listener. I'm an active listener. So I will get to know. I just sometimes wish that it would be reciprocated.
Yeah.
And not in the other, because there's the other types of women that it feels like an interrogation. And that's what I don't like. When they're like because they're not genuinely trying to find out about you. They're trying to find out if you're sneaky or not. if that makes sense. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like they'll ask you certain scenario questions, or
Like an
have you ever
interview.
cheated on anybody? Have you ever done this? Have you ever
Oh,
done? And it's like,
what a weird. Okay.
Anyways, but we're not gonna we're not gonna get into that. But what I will say is that in the other one, I did kind of put together various women, and we're just gonna call them Jennifer because I've never dated a Jennifer.
Okay.
And what I learned about Jennifer is that looks aren't always everything. And it's a couple of girls that are like that I dated strictly on looks that I thought they were very beautiful. And then come to find out it wasn't it.
Yeah.
It wasn't it. And even sometimes the intimacy can get lackluster because there's no emotional attachment there. They're just, and don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with them, but there was just no emotional
So
attachment.
the lesson is you can't judge a book by its cover, because if you're just looking at, oh, she's so beautiful, this is going to be great.
Yeah, it can't be that.
Yeah.
That's what I learned. It can't be that because I stayed in those relationships, but I wasn't very happy in them.
Yeah.
I liked the fact that they were beautiful, but I didn't like the fact that I didn't like hanging out with them for one reason or the other, right? We had differences of opinion, or maybe they were a little too self-centric, or it could be that, they wanted everything their way, right? And it's like, there's some things that I don't want to do.
Yeah.
And you have to respect that too. Same thing with you. Like if there's things that you don't want to do, I have to respect that. But sometimes they get a little more, especially if they're really, really, really super good looking.
Yeah.
Like they almost like you have to do this. It's like, okay, no, I don't, but okay, I get where you're coming from. But yeah, that's one of the things that Jennifer taught me. Although I will say this much, Jennifer also told me, and again, this is a aggregate of women. It's not just one. Is that I liked certain body types that I didn't think I was going to like. That was also interesting because I was just like, oh, I dated somebody that this body type. I didn't think I would actually like it, but turns out I do.
So it's just your preferences changing over time.
It
Again,
is.
with the
It is.
changing, like,
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. That's what I learned because especially the first time I dated somebody with a certain body type that I'd never dated before, I was like, oh, wait a minute, this is different. I don't think I'm going to like it because I like the way Gwen was. And whenever I dated somebody that was the opposite of Gwen, I was like, oh, I'm not going to like this because, of course, I like
just the being familiar with what you usually date, and here's something that's out of the norm.
Yeah, it's just like I never thought I would like that. And then it turns out, oh, I do like that. That was interesting. So the lessons aren't always bad. Sometimes it's a good lesson.
Yeah.
And it's like, ooh, I do like that. And it's like, okay. And then there was one, and we'll call her Julia, because I never dated a Julia either.
Okay.
But she was great at. She love bombed me a lot, and she was a great gift giver. And that I think also helped me to realize to pay attention because she was such a great gift giver that it was amazing. It was just, it's out of this world.
Do you do that in return as a lesson learned?
Now I do.
Okay, so now you pay attention and you give amazing gifts because of her, because of
Yes.
what you've learned.
Yes.
Okay.
Out of what I've learned. Now, I did give her a few gifts, but I missed the mark on some of those. Quite honestly, I did. I tried, but she just showed me a different thing, if you will. Again, she paid attention.
Yeah.
She paid attention a lot to the things that I liked.
Yeah.
Let's just put it that way.
I was just thinking for girls too, like, used to men, the only gift they would really give you is jewelry. That's like the standard go to. But like when you start learning that like there's other things that could be, just as nice or mean something more, don't just categorize of like, here's this one category of things that I would get people. You know what I mean? Again, just paying attention.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, what I've learned is that if you make the gift very specific, and even if it's better if you can figure out a way to do it like as an inside joke that she's gonna get, because that's the other thing. Whenever you're dating somebody, or let's say you first start chatting somebody up on text, it's hard if you don't know their sense of humor.
Yeah.
So you might think something's funny, and then you might crack a joke, and it's gonna go way over their head, and you're like, I don't get it.
Yeah.
But again, let's just say that you had an event and you went to a certain place, and you were doing tasting of tequila. And during that wine tasting or whatever, or that tasting that you were doing of tequila, you're doing a bunch of shots and you did a bunch of, what are they called? Airplanes or whatever, the flights.
Oh,
Yeah. You're trying to figure out what the hell is he talking about?
flight, yes.
Yeah,
When you
the
did the
flight.
airplane, I was like, what?
Yeah, and maybe
Okay.
that was your first date or whatever, and
Uh,
then like there was one tequila that you particularly liked or whatever, and maybe at anniversary you'd be like, "Hey, I bought this tequila because it's very specific to
yeah.
our date and it to that night." And maybe you threw up, and I had to hold your hair back, and
But
like it
you
was
loved it.
cute. Yeah, it was cute, right? It was a great experience. Like that would be a gift that she might really enjoy. Or if she tells you something about her childhood,
Yeah.
like she used to have, it could be just as simple as maybe she had a hula hoop or something. And, she loved the hula hoop when she was a kid. It's like, I really liked it, blah, blah. And then for a gift, and it doesn't have to be the only gift, mind you, but you get her a hula hoop and you're like, let's try this out. And then it might bring back some
Yeah.
nostalgia for us. And especially if she described it as like, oh, it's like a neon blue hula hoop. And I loved it. And if you find that very specific, like it's going to touch her a lot more than if you just,
I wish men would pay attention. I really do.
I'm making you sad now.
I'm just thinking, like, there's so many
I
things.
pay attention.
Yeah, but you're not my boyfriend.
Exactly. But that's what I'm saying. But I do pay attention because if you
Yeah.
can do that and you can really tap into that woman's heart for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's
And then you'll just reap the benefits. It's a win-win, guys. So
trust me when I tell you, I know.
yes, pay attention.
But yeah. Anyways, there is one other, and I'm gonna call her Aubrey. And I will say with Aubrey, the one lesson, and this is the last takeaway: the grass is not always greener on the other side. I let her go because I thought the grass was greener on the other side. It's one of the few that I ever broken up with. Turns out, not so much.
She's the one that got away.
No, well, yes and no. Yes and no.
Yeah.
It's just I never gave it the proper attention.
Yeah.
Because I just didn't give it the proper attention that it should have.
Yeah.
And it could have turned into something a whole lot better. But because I was so,
So you try to evaluate every relationship now in that regard.
yeah.
Yeah.
So if I'm in it, I want to be in it. I want to be attentive. I want to be in the relationship. I want to have
So if you say
conversations.
yes, it's like, I'm not looking for ways to get out. I said, yes, I want to date you. So I'm going to do this for real. And it's only going to be like a kind of positive vibes. I mean, you're going to have issues, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. And usually I like to do that before we get too into it.
Yeah.
Because once you're already too into it, it's hard. Especially if me being me, I'm an active listener. I really pay attention. I do all the gift giving. But then if it's too lopsided and I'm like, hey, I'm out, they usually feel a certain kind of way about it. Because now they're upset. It's like, yeah, but I wasn't being fulfilled in this relationship. Like, I get that you are. You're happy-go-lucky. Like, you're great. I'm meeting all your needs. But I really
But would
wasn't.
you tell them that though? Like, hey, this is what I need? Rather than just being like, all right, I'm out. You need to say like, hey, I really like you, but
I'm
here's
working on that.
okay.
I'm working on that because most of the time, because I deal with things myself, I don't like to share sometimes. And sometimes the relationship, they're not in a position to really hear me. So sometimes it's just better to just cut my losses and just go.
Okay.
I can sit there and give them a whole spiel. But what I've noticed, even when I have done that, when I've kind of broken it down to why, it doesn't matter. They're so upset with me that at that point they make up their own hypothesis of why I broke up with them. And they're usually like, oh, well, you were just using me, blah, blah. It's like, no,
Well, I think we should have
wasn't.
that conversation before is all I'm saying. You work on that.
For sure. But that's what I'm saying. It's hard sometimes because, like I said, in situations where they're going through something and you're constantly talking about their
Yeah.
trials and tribulations. And then the moment that you do, it's like they're not listening, they're not paying
Right.
attention, they're distracted by other things, or they get on the phone. It's like, all right. And you can stop them and say, like, hey, sometimes I do want to talk to you. And maybe they'll listen, maybe they don't. But at a certain point, it's like, all right, I can already see where this is going.
They're phubbing you. Remember from last week?
Yeah, basically. Yeah. So it's just like, all right, I'm out. But anyways, I didn't want this episode to be too sad. So hopefully it wasn't. But yeah, I think, and I know, we have a few listeners out there, but I would love if anybody has any lessons that they learned.
Yes.
Because I think that's, I think it's important. I think in every relationship, you have to take something away. And sometimes, and here's the other thing, this happens too, sometimes you have a really good friendly relationship, But because it was romantic and now you've broken up, you can't have that anymore.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's like, yeah, it's good when I have a friend and I've made a friend in this person, and it's great that we started out that way. And then it turned like there's a lot of lessons in every. So that's why, and I hate the phrase, this was a waste of my time. And this was the reason why I wanted to have this, because I hear that too often. And it's, if that's your takeaway, you're doing it wrong. If you really think that being in a relationship, and even though it ended badly, even if it was a horrible one, and your takeaway was that was a waste of my time, you're doing it wrong. You're going to keep on repeating the same mistakes over and over and over and over, because it was painful, which means that there's a lesson in there. There's takeaways from there, and it can't be a waste of time. It can't. It can't. Unless you think meditating is a waste of time, you know, and it's like, what are you doing? You're just sitting there and trying to be in the moment. You think that's it's not. Life is too precious. And there was something in there. There's a lesson, there's a heartache, there's a valuable, there's something there
Yeah.
that if you take it apart, you'll get that. And maybe, and I think people avoid that because it requires them to do a lot of work.
Yeah.
And people don't like to do the work.
It's easier to blame them. It was all them.
Exactly. But anyways, sorry, we went over. But anyways, hopefully, people enjoyed it. So,
Yeah.
but until next time.
Bye.
All right, bye.